We are in quite a moment in society right now. It's pretty exciting to look out into the world and see so much momentum happening around civil rights. A question that I get asked a lot, and a question I've asked myself a lot as a professional brand strategist or somebody that understands marketing and advertising, is how can I help? So in this session of the Strategy Supper Club, we really focused in on that question. I've been really lucky in my career that I've been able to help out in different movement spaces and nonprofits for quite some time. I've made a lot of mistakes. And so what I wanted to put together was a presentation for people for the Supper Club that we could have a discussion around how can we most powerfully show up? How can we help the leaders of these movements and nonprofits? And how can we all be a part of helping with social change? I really hope you enjoy the session. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. As ever, if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter, and I hope to see you at a Strategy Supper Club session soon. So a little bit of background on me and why I wanted to do this today, and this will not be all about me, but I just want to hopefully ground this a little bit. When I had my company, Wolf and Wilhelmina, we really started to do a lot of work with pro bono groups. And we did work, we always took on pro bono stuff here and there, mostly like a normal agency does, I would say. We also did a fundraising thing for Standing Rock where we raised money for winter supplies. We brought together a bunch of money from a bunch of different places because the supplies that were needed for a North Dakota winter were pretty intense. And so we thought if we pooled money, we could buy things like military grade tents and heating systems and things like that we could put in the camp. So we did some fundraising around there on the movement space. So we did a lot of what you would think of as like classic agency pro bono work. I also did some work advising the Obama White House, and coming out of that, I co-founded an organization called the Creative Alliance. And this is where a lot of these learnings really started to kick into gear. It was during that era of both advising and also starting the Creative Alliance. And what the Creative Alliance was it was part of a 501c3 called Civic Nation. And within it, the Creative Alliance was a group of about 100 or so people that worked in the media and marketing world, companies, agencies, sometimes individuals, that were raising their hand and saying, we want to volunteer our work and our time and our energy to help movement spaces have more professionalized communications and more professionalized just brands in the world. And so myself and my co-founder, Jason Harris, who is the CEO of Mechanism in New York, we gathered together all the people and we started to put the processes into place as to how you connect the creative class to the social movement class. And there were a lot of learnings in there about how these things connect and sometimes misconnect. After I started the Creative Alliance, I went and worked for the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is basically like big old philanthropy, right? And big philanthropy who has a ton of grantees and working with a lot of people who are on the ground in movement spaces. So I got to understand this from within the big philanthropy lens. And then since I've left Chan Zuckerberg and closed Wolf and Wilhelmina, I work now in the social sector space a lot, sometimes paid, sometimes not. My unpaid work right now is that I'm pretty deeply embedded with a group on the Lakota Reservation in Pine Ridge. And I meet with them like 3 to 5 times a week and just help them in any way that I can. And that's pro bono. So I've learned a ton because these people are frontline, grassroots, led by a woman of color. And I'm there just trying to help in any way that I can. And then also doing some work in continuing with philanthropies right now. So long way of saying that I have approached this space of collision between our world and social good world in a lot of different ways. And in every single collision that I've been a part of, like I said before, I've made mistakes in this stuff. And there are things that I wish I would have known 7 years ago when I started working in these spaces that I think would have really helped me be more impactful and more powerful when I did. So that's what this is all about. It's taking about 7 years of experience doing this, taking 7 years of mistakes and 7 years of, not everything was a mistake. There was some stuff I did learn and have applied, and hoping that this can help other people as they approach these spaces, because it's so important that we help these spaces right now. Okay, that was a long preamble. Let's get into it. So
There are a lot of, as we all know, and as we talked about in our little hello today, there's a lot of shifts, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of standing up that is happening right now. And inevitably, this is a question that a lot of us are asking ourselves. What can I, using my brand skills, my marketing skills, my advertising skills, what can I do to help? So today we're going to talk about how we can help, how we can work with social sector organizations, how we can powerfully work with movements. So the first thing that I really deeply believe that we need to understand, and that I probably didn't understand for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, certainly didn't understand when I was working in an agency and doing pro bono, was the context in which we're entering when we're working with these types of partners in these types of spaces. So there are 2 elements of the context to understand. The one is trust and one is rhythm. And we're just going to touch on each of these really quickly. So the first thing that I think we need to deeply understand when we're entering these spaces is that when you're working with a social good organization, social movement, they serve people. Ultimately, that is what they are all about. How can we get to their end user, which is usually somebody that is a member of a vulnerable population or a crisis, like say an environmental crisis where you really need to like help a vulnerable space in the world. Our skills serve profit. We have grown up our skills to make sure that corporations can make the profit that they need to make. And a lot of times these 2 things are in direct opposition to each other. In fact, I would take that one step further. They serve people and causes that have been made vulnerable by capitalistic extractive systems. And this is very much the way that most social movement people see the world. Our skill set and our careers have been developed to serve those capitalistic extractive systems. And so when someone like us walks into their space, they see somebody that is a part of the problem. And it's not that they don't recognize that we have skills. They do recognize they have skills. They just don't always trust the way that we have put those skills to work in the past. So we aren't trusted like we are in marketing departments. And this is something that took me a while to really understand what was going on, because I always thought of myself as a brand strategist, especially when I had Wolf and Wilhelmina, and now my new company is Zwolf, where I am divorced from the advertising process. So I go in with either recommendations around pure audience understanding, pure cultural understanding, or pure brand recommendations, which have nothing to do with directly selling shit. And I'm really trusted by marketing departments because they know, especially since I do pure brand strategy, that I'm not trying to sell through a piece of work. I'm not trying to win a Cannes Lion. I'm trying to help them with their business. And in many ways, they look to me to be the outside provocateur and the truth teller. And so I've taken a lot of pride in my career that I've walked into organizations and said, hey, you're not really understanding how people are relating to the world right now. And you're not really respecting the way that people are relating to your category. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to be the person who is the voice of the people, the voice of culture, and I'm going to help you, marketing department, understand this better. And because of that stance that I've had so much in my career, I've always felt a pretty decent amount of trust from marketing departments in the beginning. I did not feel that all the time walking into social movement spaces, because more often or not, what they trust is somebody who works in the comms department, and we'll get to that in a second, but they don't understand and they don't trust people that work for brand, because brand represents these companies who are using a highly capitalistic system to extract value from the populations that they're trying to serve. And they see us as a part of the system. And so it's sometimes quite difficult to overcome that initial, flinch that they will get from us. And at first, I'm going to be honest with you, I used to be offended by it. I used to be like, hey, I'm here, I'm trying to help, like put your hackles down, like one team, one dream. But when you start to understand how much work they do and how much these systems really impact the work that they do and how it impacts populations they're trying to serve, it kind of got my hackles down more, being like, you know what, I understand, because this system is something that they're battling against every day. I've spent my entire career and my skill set serving that system. But they do trust comms people. And let's talk about why they trust comms people. So when you go into these organizations, it's very rare, unless they're very big, very progressive or young, that they will have somebody who is a brand person, who has the title of brand person inside of there. You just don't find it. Brand is not a concept that usually exists inside of these social movements or social orgs. But what they will always have is a head of comms. And they might then also have a head of digital, and digital to them is anything, well, we'll get into it in a second, but digital is basically digital. But their head of comms is pretty much what we would consider in our world to be the brand strategist. They are the person who is figuring out what position they are in the world, what messages they give, and where those messages go. And so if you're working with a political campaign, especially, your head of comms is like the brand strategist, and they are the one that is running the brand and messaging show. And the reason that the head of comms has always been such a powerful thing in these movements, and I'm adding in political now as well, is because of a quick historical diversion that we're going to do called the Fourth Estate. The Fourth Estate comes out of, it was a British concept to start. And the three other estates were, I hope I get this right, if I remember this, the clergy, the commoners, and the royalty. And the press was the Fourth Estate. And the press is who kept the clergy and the royalty honest when they were dealing with the commoners. They were on the side of the commoners. And so, like we much think of here in the United States, the press is part of our society. A healthy press is very important for a healthy society and for a healthy democracy. And so the press is considered a good thing. So your comms person is the person who relates to the press. And historically, the comms person, before all the age of digital, before like we got really crazy with like micro-targeting, all this kind of stuff, your comms person was there to help manage the relationship with the press, so that the people that the organization were trying to advocate for were more better represented in the world at large. And so it was a tool of advocacy. And so this is why you have a legacy of communications directors being like their head strategists, because the press was the way that they saw that they relate to the world, much that we have legacy in marketing and advertising, where we say, oh my God, like an old school strategist just thinks in TV, because TV was our megaphone. In their world, the press was their megaphone. And so your comms director is like the shit in their organization. So one thing that I would really encourage anyone to do is that sometimes in our world, we think, oh, it's comms, like comms is off to the side, brand first, comms second. When you're entering their world, find the comms person and become their best friend, because those are the people that are really running the show of the kind of thinking that we do. Okay. Another thing and so they trust their comms person. So that's the first thing, trust, right? The trust sits with the comms people. The trust does not sit with us. We represent the systems that they are not too crazy about. And so you're just immediately, you have to like understand where their power sits and where the messaging power sits and how to navigate through that. The second thing to understand is that they do not work at the rhythm of nor answer to quarterly reports. And so the pace is different. The accountability is different. The way that things move through a system is different because they do not have shareholders. They are not serving a widget that makes profit. They are serving ultimately people. And people do not work at the rhythm of a quarterly report. In fact, I would say the rhythms that a social movement or a political movement works towards is advocacy, which is somewhat slow, comparatively. Politics are somewhat slow, although we could say in this era, politics have been whipping around and moving quite quickly. But to actually get political consensus, to get things done, to get a law passed, that takes quite some time and a lot of political maneuvering. The press, which works relatively fast, almost overnight, right? And change works somewhat slow. And so where we're used to like this constant, I would say almost like methodical drumbeat of quarterly answering, quarterly culpability, it doesn't work that way. People don't work that way. Social change doesn't work that way. And so when sometimes we think, oh my God, they're working so slow, or oh my God, they are like speeding ahead so quickly because a singular headline came out or a poll came out, oh my God, they have to respond to the poll. It's a different kind of rhythm where sometimes you're moving very slowly and other times you have to go really quickly and you have to be able to shift gears between first and sixth really quickly. And the thing that is sometimes difficult for our world to understand is that most of the stuff that they're advocating for, although a lot of organizations are getting much better about this, are not readily quantifiable. And I would say, even though there are organizations that are getting better at quantifying the effects of the work that they do, there are just some things that you can't quantify, that you can't say that success can be totally measured because you're dealing with people. right? And people, you just can't always measure every single way that an organization is successful. So not only are they working at a different pace, they're also working in a way that doesn't always have a hard number to put behind it. So this is the context that I just wanted us all to just be aware of, this idea of, trust and why sometimes people from our world get mistrusted and misunderstood. And also the rhythm that they work at will sometimes feel really, I think in a bad way when we look at this, we look at it as undisciplined. We're like, oh, you're speeding up so quickly, or you're so slow here. Why don't you put some long-term plans in place when you're in the slow period? It's just not the way that a lot of these organizations work. So here are some tips for showing up. Tip number 1, realize that you're expensive. The fees in our world feel absolutely batshit insane crazy to them. What we would normally charge a corporate client for a project is just blows their fucking minds. So I'm not, in some ways this just means like I have a fee, like if I'm charging a nonprofit, I have a lower fee on my scale that I use for them. A lot of times I do pro bono work. This is all a personal decision by you. Like I'm not going to tell anyone how to deal with their fees, but just know that like if you walk in with a normal fee that you would charge, say like a Google or a Nike or a Coca-Cola, they're going to like, their jaw is going to hit the ground and they're going to be pretty like, whoa, like that is a lot of money for something that I don't quite understand what you do. So just be really cognizant of that. And also just be cognizant of, because we're not serving the widget, right? So, I can throw a big fee in front of a marketing department because they understand that you're investing in thinking that will ultimately make the sale better. When you're working with these organizations, the money that they're spending on you is money that they're not putting towards the end user. It's money that they're taking away from the front line. And there usually is that calculus going on in their head that like, if I give this person X amount of dollars, that is X amount of dollars that will not go towards feeding these kids. And it might be a slightly unfair calculus because, you have to like make sure your communications and your brand is in sync. So like people will feed more kids. Like we can give them the investment argument, but the investment argument is harder to justify when there's actually humans at the end of the equation versus say selling a widget. So just remember that our prices can sometimes freak people out. The next thing is that scopes rarely hold. I saw Katie Fitzgerald is on this call. I hope she speaks up during the discussion. She and I just finished a project in the social sector space. Our scope went all over the place. The scope, what we ended up delivering was not at all what we scoped out 5 weeks earlier. So the one thing just to remember is that especially in this era, things rarely stay consistent for these organizations. And so this used to drive me crazy. I used to be like, oh, the scope, I'm going to lose money, or like I'm wasting I'm burning my people, that kind of thing. And what I've realized when I'm working in social sector space is just to take a deep breath. And just be like, look, the scope is probably not going to hold. And I either have to build in flexibility in that scope or just be chill when the scope goes off track, because it's going to go off track. It always will. This is a trick that I learned to myself this fall when I started working with the organization on the reservation. I made a list for the executive director. And I didn't make a jargony list, but I just basically made a list of like, here are all the things that I can help you with. I can help you understand your audience better. I can help you with a social strategy. I used to be a writer, so I could probably write some social posts for you. I can help you write a grant application. I can help you through an OKR process. And I just made her a very tangible list that was stripped of jargon so she could better understand how she could utilize me. Because if we walk in like, I can help you with your brand narrative, I mean, that means absolutely nothing to them. Right. I mean, they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I can help you with your brand. What does that mean? And so I found it to be really helpful to make a super detailed list. It's like 50 things long of like, here's all the things I can help you with. And also here's the things that I can't help you with. So if you need a logo, I can't design the logo, but I can help you find somebody that can, and I can help you direct them and keep them on track. And so it's just being really specific about the ways that you can add value to the organization so they better know how to use you. The other thing that I've been doing a lot lately is I just gather up my frameworks. So I have the basic tools ready to go. Like, what is the outline of a creative brief? What is a basic engagement plan? What is a basic client meeting flow? What are survey basics? What are basic analytic tools? Because it just really helps them when, like, a lot of these organizations don't use briefs. And I used to be like, we have to write a brief. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, let's just go through the process and I'll show you. That wasn't the right way to handle that. What I should have said is like, here's an example of a creative brief. here is what we use a brief for. Here's the elements that we need to have in a brief so that you can have a fully fleshed out brief. And by having those, just the templates ready for people, you can actually show them the value of the thinking that we do and the tools that we bring, and then get them to adopt them more readily, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to do this engagement thing, just go with me, it's going to be fine. Right? Like it just, that kind of like, trust me, doesn't work. So just gather up your basic frameworks. And for us, it's like 101, right? It's like your 101 brief template. It's your 101 engagement plan brief template. It doesn't have to be hyper sophisticated. It doesn't have to be crazy, but it's showing them, it's starting to put some tangibility around what kind of things that you can bring to their organization. Listen hard. Learn their culture as thoroughly as you can. They're usually pretty good at communicating because they are so press oriented. And so a lot of the people that work in these organizations are very used to having like press interviews done and like having to deal with the press. And so a lot of times when I do stakeholder interviews, I can feel myself getting that kind of press ready verbiage from them. So what I've been starting to ask with these organizations is, can I sit in on your leadership meeting or any meeting where decisions are meaningfully being made? So I can really understand, like, what do you value? How do you make decisions? When you have to make a call between the money going one way or the money going another way, where does the money go and why? So their cultures are so different than marketing department cultures. And so just taking the time as much as you can up front to understand their cultures and work with their cultures will ultimately make you more successful in this space. Do your homework. Do your homework. It's really hard for me as a white person a lot of times to work with a Native American organization. They reference things that I don't understand. They reference historical events that I don't get. There's cultural things that they reference that I don't understand. But I cannot stop a meeting and say, can you please explain to me why Crazy Horse is so important in your culture, or what Wopila means, right? So whenever, especially when I start working with an organization, I have a steady stream of books that I'm reading in the background, just so I can acquaint myself more with the issues that they're facing and also just the cultural context in which they live. And I'm Googling a lot. And I'm trying as little as possible to make them explain anything to me. The other thing that really helps with this is if you have a trusted friend from the community. So I'm really lucky that I have some Native American family. And when something comes up that I can't find in my Googling or in my book reading, I can give, Stacy or Damon a call and be like, I don't understand why this dynamic's popping up. Can you explain it to me? And they are there because we are friends and we are family and, we take care of each other, that they are willing to put the energy in to educate me on the side. So I'm not distracting the organization when they're in flow. So homework is super important in this. And then finally, this is, I think, the most important question. It's not, this is what I can do for you. This is what I do in the world. This is what this is what I do, but how can I be helpful to you? I've given you a list of all the things that I do. How can you deploy me? How can I be most helpful to you? And especially if you're in more of a long-term, like looser relationship with an organization where maybe the scope isn't so tight, you're just trying to show up. You're just trying to be helpful to them. Once you give them your list of like, here's the 20 to 50 to 100 things that I'm really good at, then ask your person, like, how can I be helpful to you? And I've had this answer be, can you just write some social posts this weekend because we're behind? And I'm like, totally. I don't really write social posts anymore, but you know what? Like that's what they need in that moment. And so just having that flexibility to jump in, and when they have that list where they kind of understand like where you can help and where you can't, this question can actually be really powerful, and you can really help the organization in ways that can help them move ahead and just add more capacity. Because a lot of times the issue with these organizations is they just don't have enough capacity. They don't have enough hands. They don't have enough brains. They don't have enough people. And they don't need people to come in and reinvent the wheel. They need people that can slot into the movement that they're doing and help them with things that are already lacking. So this question of how can I be helpful to you has been one that's been the most powerful for me, especially when I'm working more like day to day with some of these organizations, because you really feel a sense of value. Like you feel like when you do that thing for them, when you write the 3 social posts over the weekend, they're truly like, that was really helpful because it gave our team a break, or it like helped us get ahead. And we just really needed that time and space to do that. So I think this is actually the most important question. How can I be helpful to you? Okay, let's discuss. I'm going to stop sharing And I would just love to open this up to questions, comments, or other people that have worked in the space. I probably missed I know I missed a ton of stuff. So any tips that anyone else that has worked in this space, I'd love to hear it as well.
I'm really interested in the list of things you don't do. I know that's personal for everyone, but it's in the scope. What have you found works with them, quote unquote, or they're accepting them? Oh, okay, got it. You're not going to design a logo, right? Like,
Right.
Because it's more about what are they assuming we do?
Exactly. So when they hear brand, a lot of times they think logo, they think color, they think design. And I am not the person to do any of those things. So I have to make that clear to them up front, but I know people that do that. And so in my list of things that I do, I will put things of like, I can connect you to really good logo designers. I can help you manage them and make sure you get a logo that you love, but I cannot put pen to paper myself. It's not me.
Okay.
Yeah. Meredith.
Hey,
Hi.
Thanks, Heidi. I work in this space.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad you're here, actually.
I work in healthcare in Canada, so we do like fundraising. Healthcare organizations, like big hospitals, tend to be a little bit more sophisticated in terms of brand and marketing than a lot of other nonprofits, but still, we have a lot of the same challenges around like being limited in terms of capacity. And then of course, just not having that profit first perspective. So, for example, like we just don't have like the infrastructure to be able to manage like the most amazing brand and marketing strategy. And I think here, like the not reinventing the wheel, like I've had so many people approach me as like the director of marketing and communications, saying like, I want to help you, especially during COVID when people are really willing to share their skill set. And they're like, I'm going to set up this like, big like paid social campaign for you. And I'm going to like take over your channels and all of that. And that's not helpful for me because like, I don't have the capacity to carry out like that awesome like social media plan that you're doing and all of that. And when I do work with pro bono partners, so we pay for our creative when we do campaigns, but we do work with a planner pro bono. And like what's really helpful for me is when, like they just listen and they ask what we need and what can be helpful. And I had another point, but but anyway, that was just really refreshing.
Cool. And thank you for contributing because like we all should be listening to you on this call. So feel free to take over anytime you want.
Well, again, like we're completely different. Like we're like I think a lot of the stuff you were saying is especially true when you're working with like justice-based organizations, which like, especially the comms, like the trust in comms. But yeah, it's really frustrating when like I'm approached by like a creative agency that wants to help us with a campaign, but does not ask any questions about like what our business strategy is. And like, it does not line up at all. And it's clear, like they just want to use us to do something cool and maybe win an award. So
yeah, I think that happens a lot.
People stop using nonprofits to win awards.
That is a really good point. I think it's a great point because honestly, when I was working in agencies, that's what you took the nonprofit work to do. It was always to like, it was like, that was the justification. We're not going to get paid for this, but we're going to win an award. Always.
And it's like, it doesn't help us. Like I've seen so many examples in Canada where it was just like so off strategy and not helpful. And like, yeah, don't do that.
Awesome. That's an awesome perspective. Thank you, Meredith.
Anyway.
Cool. Adrian, I saw you were unmuted a second ago. Was that on purpose?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. No, don't be sorry. I just want to get to you.
So it's good to see everybody. The one I was going to say, because I've been doing this quite a bit, and it's interesting because in my background of being in the agency world forever too, Heidi, like when I have gone and approached my executive committee, very much like what you said, Meredith, to be like, okay, leadership team, this is this cause that I support. I'd like to, use our resources, open it up to everybody to give them this opportunity, really more in the spirit of mentorship. But to your point, Meredith, like it ends up being like, what do you mean we're not going to be able to? Well, you're using this as an opportunity to expose these kids or these families to looking at advertising a different way or whatever it is at my agency right now that I'm thinking of that we were going to do. But that it was meant more to be mentorship and going totally as another left turn. The one thing I would say, Heidi, to your point about the tools and like briefs, it's a lot of facilitation of communication too between the internal team, because what I've seen is like they haven't talked to each other, and the expectations, to your point, the semantics and the lexicon is so different between the different audiences. And then especially if they have to present it to the board, like one of the things I did was work on National Domestic Violence Hotline. So they did have a board, and like we had to help them come up with the language to do what they were going to do. But at the same time, they hadn't talked to each other. So every time we tried to present something, to your point, which was like very much about activation and helping these women be able to find the resources, especially in their local communities, and get out and their families out in a safe way. That is all we were concerned about. But like, again, the agenda, because some of the partners were aligned with the NFL at the time, it was super complicated. And so being able to facilitate actually those, I'm saying therapy sessions, but those internal sessions are so important. So to your point, help doesn't get misconstrued as like you being, you're aligning with somebody that you shouldn't be, like really when they should just be talking to each other, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like sometimes as strategists, we go in and do things that we never thought we were going to do in these organizations, like that kind of facilitation or
I would say my experience is, it's to Meredith's point, like much more of a therapist to really sit, listen, and talk, and let them talk to each other. Because I always start backwards, like, what does failure look like if we're not helping you, and what does success look like, so that we can make it bite-sized and work through it. But talking to each other doesn't happen as often as you think, because everybody has like 9 different jobs and they don't necessarily know what the other's doing. I will stop. But
no, that's great, Adrienne. That's great. And I think it goes back to something else we've talked about in Strategy Supper Club before, where strategists set the tone for a project, because we are the first people that touch a project, have a deliverable. And so if we set the tone with a movement-based nonprofit of like, we are here to listen, we are here to serve, then it will inevitably infect the rest of the creative team that we're working with. And so I think you're bringing that up really elegantly of like, sometimes our role is just to get people to talk to each other and just to get them to listen.
Well, and the other thing I would say to pile on and like yell from the mountaintops from what you said is also the fact that the brief, actually, whatever format that is, but those 3 or 4 questions, whatever those may be, really do help facilitate discussion, because then it opens up in a neutral way what things are missing. And if we can't answer them, who do we need to go to, or do we need to wait a year to figure it out? But at least it helps bring that communication and press alignment, so that they can manage for it. Because to your point, like they didn't necessarily think about it that way. And they also didn't know what the other department or whoever's perspective was. So the brief is powerful, even with 2 questions, because they definitely don't agree on what they should say.
Absolutely.
1 question could be a ticking time bomb. So anyways, I will stop and let others speak.
No, it's great. It's great. I'm grateful for everything you're putting in there.
So mine's more kind of a nuts and bolts question. I'm new in my career, and so I just helped a nonprofit in East Africa, but it's kind of more to the lines of the brief template that you were talking about, just kind of having that template in place. And so I was wondering, so usually when you have that, it would like create a brief template, it would be for a profit company. So something really focused on product. And I'm wondering, as far as approaching social justice and social good organizations, what kind of would you bring as far as a brief template? Would it just be kind of like the outlines of what it is, or would it be more it just seems maybe a little weird to bring in like a example of a for-profit one, or do you just kind of make an example one?
It's a good question. I just went through this with the organization I work with, and I literally just ripped a template down from the web, and it was a for-profit one. And because like at the end of the day, it's like, what do you like? It's the classic question: what do you want your audience to think, feel, and do? Right? Like, I want them to think, feel, and do these things. And in many ways, like the discipline that we put around getting audiences to do something is a really powerful thing to bring into this space. And one of the key tools of our discipline is the creative brief. And so at the end of the day, like, what is the ultimate, what is success? Who are our audiences? What is the context? I mean, all of these things are very valuable things for a social sector organization to think through. So I actually just use private sector briefs and brief templates, and I just knock in their problem.
Quick question on I guess figuring out kind of education level of certain issues. Just because I know you said that when you take on like a certain nonprofit job, you educate your best so no one has to kind of educate for you, and then you kind of slot in, I can't find this kind of answer for this issue. At what type of like criteria do you're like, wow, I don't really kind of know enough about this, or I feel like this type of information is like not kind of helpful. Like, where can you help benefit? I'm only speaking because like as a queer Latino male who's cisgendered, there are a slew of social causes that I am really passionate about to kind of get behind. But then I'm also aware that there's a slew of other really injustices that I'm like unaware to, and how to kind of branch into those spaces given my current knowledge of things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to side answer your question, Ruben, because I've been struggling with this a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and that there's a lot of stuff that's broken in the world. And if there's something that you're more passionate about fixing, don't be embarrassed about that that's more your jam, right? At least I think. And I'm really open to criticism on this, because like in the spirit of like pure vulnerability, this is something I've been struggling with the last couple of weeks, because with everything that's going on with civil rights right now in the United States, I've been doing what we're supposed to be doing. I've been signing the petitions. I've been donating the money. I've been marching. I've been, trying to support as much as I can. But at the end of the day, like, I'm really passionate about Native American issues, which is just as much about taking down the system as Black American issues are, right? And I felt guilty about that, because like while other people are marching, I'm still spending a lot of time with the organization that I work with, trying to help in the best I can, which is obviously limited. It's not great. But then, my boyfriend's like, but Heidi, like you're still like doing good work. Like, like he's like, it's okay. It's okay that this is an area of civil rights that you are just a little more passionate about. It's not that you're saying that Black people don't matter. It's just that this is where you've put like a decade of work in. Right. And so a long way of answering Ruben, like, yes, like I think we should always be expanding and trying to learn about as many of these issues as possible, and always expanding our mind on this and read up. But like, if there's a certain sliver that like really gets you going, you should also just feel, I think, comfortable just to like run after that sliver and really dive deep into the issue area that you're the most passionate about. But I'm also happy for anyone to tell me I'm full of shit on this. I've literally been wrestling with this for the last couple of weeks on this exact issue. And I don't know if that answered your question, Ruben. Sorry.
No,
I'm having a therapy session with a kid.
It does. And I actually also wanted to quickly couple that with, based on your experience or how to navigate, have you ever been met with the quote, this kind of savior complex of like white savior, or just like ever the things, just because like I'm all those identities listed previously, but I am fair skinned. So oftentimes I do have the impression of like the white privilege or things like that, not understanding certain nuanced topics that I've completely. So I was like, how have you kind of navigated around that as well?
Oh, okay. Now we're okay. All right. Buckle up for everybody. Here we go. First of all, follow No White Saviors on Instagram. Like, it'll knock your ass as a white person into place. So definitely follow that account. Look, like, it's been a really long journey for me. I grew up in an evangelical church, and we went on mission trips when I was a kid, and I went on mission trips down to South America to help convert people to Christianity. And they had us proselytizing in the street as a kid. And it was the second trip that I took that I was like, the church isn't for me.
I can't do this anymore. And it was really that whole attitude of going down and being like, I'm going to another country to tell other people what they should believe and saying that their beliefs aren't legit. And so this whole white savior thing, I have a long history of trying to fight this in myself. Right. And, I try to check it as much as I can, but of course it always comes up. Right. But the thing that's been really helpful for me in keeping my ass in place is working on domestic issues. I think it's really easy for me personally as a white person to say, oh, I'm going to go to Africa, or I'm going to go to South America, or I'm going to go somewhere else, and I'm going to help all these poor little brown and black people, and I'm going to come in and show them the way, right? But when you're working with issues of Black Americans, or in this country, we've been really shitty to Asian Americans, we've been shitty to Latin Americans, we've been really shitty to Native Americans. As a white person, I find I am dealing with my culpability in this every single day, every day, because I have benefited from the fact that these Native American people that I work with have been oppressed. And when they talk about decolonizing, what they're talking about is my grandparents, right? Or my great-great-grandparents who are homesteaders. And so working on domestic issues for me feels very powerful, because I can't get away from my culpability in it when I work on domestic issues. And so this is why I don't work on international issues, because I feel like we have a lot to fix on our home soil. And I'm sorry, I'm stumbling because I'm just venting to you all. It just keeps me in check. It does. But I'm still, as much as I try to fight it, I probably still act like an asshole white savior, even though I try really hard not to. But I think that's such a journey we're all on, right? But I think the big thing with me has been sit back and listen. It is not my responsibility to lead any of these organizations. My job is to ask them every single day, how can I help? What can I do to make your life easier today? And by orienting around that question, instead of saying, I know the answer, I know how to fix this thing, I know a process, I think that also helps as well. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Okay.
Olivia and I were calling in from an international nonprofit, and we're on the brand marketing team. And we definitely, in my experience, I've had agencies come in and have experienced from the other end that tension. And I agree with what you were saying. And I want to provide just a little bit more perspective on that tension. Yeah. So I think perhaps in a lot of nonprofits, there isn't that brand marketing team. But it is in our company, but it is just 7 years old. They just decided to invest in brand marketing not that long ago. Mm-hmm. They don't understand what brand means. And so a lot of the work that my team does is leveling up to leadership, what the benefit of building a brand and brand awareness is. And so what I always want from agencies coming in, because at least leadership really does trust that expertise more than they trust our team, is being that fellow kind of advocate for the importance of cutting jargon, the importance of building brand, the importance of not cutting our budget every year, giving money and dollars to advertising, because as a nonprofit, that budget gets cut a lot, because we're constantly looking at the ROI of things that are more going to lead to fundraising, as well as being able to help vulnerable populations. And then, yeah, I guess just from my perspective on tension, we've had agencies come in and they haven't understood our team, our role, and that we have expertise as well. And we are also experts in our field as brand marketing strategists on an international nonprofit. And so sometimes we've been talked down to and just let me explain everything to you. And it's okay, I know what you're saying. I can speak the same language as you actually. So just understanding, know your audience, simple stuff.
I think it's a great point, Elaine. I think there was definitely a vibe I don't know when this vibe came in, like where it was like, well, we're private sector people, so we can do it better, more efficiently, more quickly than you can do it. And again, it goes back to when, at least I think, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, like when you're serving communities, when you're serving people, it is not always about this hardcore, efficient, fast thing. Like it doesn't always work that way because people and communities are complicated, right? So you can't just say widget marketing works for people change, right? But I do think there is sometimes this attitude of private sector people of like nonprofits are inefficient, they waste a lot of money. I'm going to show you how we do it right. I'd be curious your point of like your reflection on what I just said, if that's or if that resonates with you.
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates, especially on the more kind of programmatic side.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I should say, tension within our own company between like more of the programs and like the direct kind of helping of people versus the kind of fundraising side of the house, which that's kind of where I live. And so on the fundraising side, it is very much like, how can we get those, like build our numbers, build our email list, build our social following, all of that. So there is a little bit more of that quick number metrics. But yeah, very much it's very difficult. And our company has been working on trying to measure and figure out what are the metrics in order to measure progress, measure change, and that takes a ton of conversation. It's a very collaborative company. Every voice matters, so it takes a lot to change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you bring up another good point about the collaboration cultures that you usually find in nonprofits, where in private sector, a lot of times you just have, you know, hopefully benevolent dictators that are making decisions, getting things done, right? A lot of times in nonprofit, especially I experienced this a lot at Chan Zuckerberg, both in Chan Zuckerberg itself and in a lot of the grantees, the consensus culture of like, you had to talk to everybody before a decision went forward. It sometimes drove me, quite frankly, fucking insane. But it's just something that I had to learn to like take a deep breath and be like, okay, no, but this is good. And so I think it's a really good point that you bring up, Elaine, that like a lot of these organizations have that consensus culture or collaboration, and it comes from a good place, right? It comes from the right place.
It drives us insane too, but yes.
Yeah. Got you. Cool.
I was interested in the tension you set up early in your talk around kind of how the objectives are really at odds, and I'd imagine that you spend a lot of time trying to explain how there actually is more similarity than they think, and kind of ways that you can add value based on your experience in the private sector. But I'd be curious if you ever acknowledged that like your experience isn't relevant, or like if you ever speak to that kind of profound kind of difference in orientation, and kind of just like, I don't know, just do you acknowledge it? Do you speak about it? Like, yeah.
I think a long time ago, I didn't think it was different, and so it was like, I'm just trying to help. Right. And I would get a little bit defensive about that. When I would talk about like, we're doing activation campaigns for a brand, I had somebody say to me, well, that's not grassroots, that's AstroTurf. You're just paying for that shit. That was fun. So that was a fun day. But I do think now it's like, you're right. I do come from a different orientation. I know that. And the thing that has been helpful when I kind of lay down the law a little bit about like, do you want me in this room or not? This is what I say. I say, look, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Google, all of them, Nike, they have spent billions and billions of dollars teaching people how to take in messages and how to behave and act. They've spent billions of dollars studying how to do it the best way. They've spent billions of dollars conditioning people to take in information a certain way. You guys haven't. I know the tricks. I know all of them. I've been inside of all of those companies. I know how all this shit works. Let me use the magic to help you guys, because they've trained the world. I know I've been a part of that training. Let's use the training to do some good in the world. And a lot of times when I frame it that way of like,
culture's already been trained. You're not going to retrain culture to take in messages a different way or to engage with an organization a different way. We've already done that training, but let me help you know how to do that. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, all right, got it. I understand why you might be helpful to this organization.
Can I make one really
Yeah,
quick build
go,
on that? I know
go,
we're
go.
at the end of our time. Yet another way is also just to completely lean into your ignorance, and especially with organizations that have a tendency to sort of do this strategy by committee or marketing by committee thing. You get into your own sort of conversation. Somebody mentioned earlier, break the jargon sort of thing. I've worked on my share of feminine hygiene products, on battered women's shelters, things that I go in and say, I'm a blank slate. Help me help you. And it really forces them to codify and simplify even their own language and to do a much, much better job of trimming the language and getting it down to its essence. And so a lot of times you can use your own sort of, outsider status as a way to say, hey, use me as the sort of barometer for ignorance here. Restate it in a way that an outsider can get it is oftentimes it helps to be ignorant about a lot of things anyway, but I can kind of flex that too.
Are there any orgs that you can point to, maybe that are not in the big philanthropy space, some orgs that are on leaner budgets that you think are doing a really great job with their strategy that we might be able to learn from?
That's interesting. That's a really good question. You know what, Tamara, I'm always terrible at this when I'm asked for examples off the top of my head, but let me get back to you on that. I would say, actually, there's one woman that I could point you to immediately. There's a clothing line. It's called Arenda Tribe. And she is a Navajo Diné woman who was in the fashion world in LA for a really long time and then went back home to work in New Mexico to help her people. And she has now really gotten into COVID response on the res and gotten a lot of money and support pointed towards PPE and other ways that the Navajo Nation needs support right now. And I think that, I think her name is Amy. She understands brand and she does a really good job. And it's about consistency. It's not that she's doing anything catchy or funny or anything like that. She just, knows how to reach out. She knows how to tap into other people. She knows how to keep a consistent message going. And I think she's a good one to check out.
I was originally working as a journalist. And so something to keep in mind whenever you're pitching to journalists in general is just like the 5 different things that make things newsworthy. And it's been so many years. It's proximity, timeliness, conflict, relevance, significance, and novelty.
Wow. Okay.
And so those are like the more of those that you check the boxes for, the better chance you're going to be able to pitch this to a journalist and they will pick it up and run with it.
That's awesome.
So adjacently related.
No, that's actually great. Carol, do you mind popping those in the chat so other people, we can have them? Because
sure.
That is something like when you say, what can I be helpful with today? They're like, can you write our press release? And it's like, I'm a brand strategist. I've never done that. You know what I mean? So yeah, awesome.
The templates really help too.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Something you said at the top was respecting the fourth estate and knowing these organizations care more about it than marketers tend to kind of put press and PR over in kind of the influencer bucket. So just a little bit of email marketing for the team. One, if you have any PR friends, reporter friends, PR agency friends, take them out to a virtual beer or coffee and pick their brain and understanding not just how to pitch a reporter, but we're used to designing for consumer or customer audiences, right? Consumers, people who are going to buy shit. And satisfying that human need is very different than a reporter's need. What's their angle, right? So something I do prior to any podcast interview or even meeting with any one of you guys is I'm going to look you guys up on Google News and I'm going to look at your coverage and I'm going to look at the reporters that have covered you or where your company has been covered and understand what the angles that those reporters care about. And that's something you can ask early on, like look up the company's coverage. Who do they want to influence? And there's usually like 5 or 6 reporters. So for example, if you had a CPG client, it would be like Emily Nussbaum at the Wall Street Journal, Jack Neff at Ad Age, and some guy at Ad Exchanger, right? And read 10 of their pieces. So it's kind of like peel the onion back and your new customer, your new consumer, your new audience you're designing for is that reporter. Because because again, they care so much about the fourth estate. And you have to like temper it with the evil marketing of influencer marketing and like literally try to understand what keeps the reporter up at night, what is their angle, what's the cause they're trying to solve for, and then how do you align comms to them. A tactical question. So
Sure.
if you're putting your hat out there and want to go lend your help without coming across as the savior, are there resources, kind of like this help a reporter out, on the press side, et cetera? Do those exist, or is it just kind of tap the network?
That's a good question, Roman. I've always tapped the network on this. And because part of it's vouching, right? But if there are, I would love to hear if anyone has a better answer to that.
Yeah, hi y'all. One of the things that I learned in the latest project that I did with Heidi, and then also in a prior project, was to get to know the invisible forces at play. I think that it's pretty easy to work with a corporate client. They give you their nice, infrastructure, and you're like, all right, here are the various stakeholders that we have to impress along this path. And I think that it gets a lot more complicated when you're working with a nonprofit that might have, big donors. It might have government influences. It might have smaller consumer donors. And so really starting to map out, like my brain works well in charts and diagrams, like starting to map out, who are our stakeholders, who are the influencers, like who do we actually have to get sign off with, and how is that different from what I normally do is really helpful. And then I wanted to ask a question. You talked about flexibility, and we know that, golly, like change is the way of the day. It's happened so fast. Like, what are some things that you're doing to help the organizations that you work with change rapidly to react to the world?
That's a good question. It's going to sound a little, honestly, a big part of it is like getting your core brand, your narrative, whatever you want to call it. Like, what is that core thing that you believe in? Who is your enemy? What do you show up? Why do you show up? And just getting that really cleanly articulated. Because as complexity comes in, if there's some solid just frame of like, this is who we are, this is why we exist, I think that that's something that a brand strategist can very powerfully do for one of these organizations, because we know how to do that. We know how to get that story tight, right? And so when a new wave comes in, then it can be, well, because we believe this, then this is what we're going to do, right? So I think that's one of the most valuable things we can do. And to your earlier point, Katie, you are actually intuitively doing something that advocacy organizations do, which is called power mapping. Power mapping, it can be dirty stuff, guys. It's crazy. What power mapping is like, say you have a lawmaker that you need to vote a certain way on a bill, right? In advocacy, what they'll do is they'll put that person in the middle of the thing, of the page. It's literally a drawing. It's a diagram. It's a circle. You put that person in the middle of it, and then you put spokes out of all the things and people that influence that person. So maybe that person, if we were power mapping Trump, Fox News would be a spoke, right? And you would try to like influence Fox News. It could be their wife. It could be their third child. It could be their assistant, their chief of staff, who like really runs the show, right? It's way more like tricksy work than we ever do in brand world. I was like, wow, like this is dirty shit. Like you're thinking about their families. You're thinking about like who's surrounding them. But that's what they do. And they power map it. And then they figure out like, here's the main spokes. And then who influences those spokes, right? And then they start figuring out how they can apply pressure to the entire map to get to the central person if they can't get to the central person directly. I know it's pretty ninja. It's pretty like svelte. I like it. So yeah, that's power mapping.
I have a quick question on that.
Yeah, Ruben.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Would that look like the power mapping? Would that be for a specific person, or like can you power map for multiple pillars of influence you're trying to kind of apply pressure to?
Yeah, I think like the way I've seen it done, it's like, I think you could do it to anything. I really think we could power map audiences if we wanted to. It's kind of like engagement propaganda planning. I don't know if you guys knew of a guy, why is the name slipping me right now? Oh my God. Griffin Farley. He was at BBH. He passed away from cancer a while ago, but he had this whole theory of engagement planning called propagation planning, which is you plan for the people that influence the people you want to influence. And it was basically power mapping is what it was. You put like influence maps around audiences and you figure out how to influence them through the people that influence them. Same thing.
Yeah, I feel like the best, this is a sloppy analogy, but the best one I can think of is that like my 9 to 5 client brand work versus nonprofit work is like using a machete versus using a scalpel, right? Like I think that a lot of times with my corporate brand clients, it's about optimizing. It's about what can we be doing better, but more than that, it feels like everything from a business and from a profit perspective is lensed through this idea of opportunity cost, right? Like you are losing out on X opportunity by not doing this. You are hurting yourself by not doing this. You are losing out on this. You could be doing this, but the fact that you're not is resulting in this, right? Whereas with the public sector, and I've learned this through putting my foot in my mouth a lot, is that it is that scalpel, right? It's much more nuanced. It's much more about incisive, tiny change over time. It's about figuring out how to place that pebble to redirect the flow of a river, right? Like it's not about opportunity cost. It's about the potential that something might have. The fact that, oh, if we do X, Y, and Z, this is how we could grow. And as someone who is very, very hustle oriented, is used to having to scare my clients into doing things, that has been I think a rude awakening, but it's one that's necessary, right? Because I think, Heidi, what you said at the beginning is so true. Ultimately, there aren't stockholders that they're trying to please, right? They're trying to actually impact and change people's lives. Like I worked with an animal shelter with the Anti-Cruelty Society in Chicago on a project for about 4 months. And what helped me the most was did we figure out ways to like make the UX of their website far more intuitive and like lead to more donations? Yes, but what actually I think helped us not only as a team figure out what they needed, but gain their trust was do ride-alongs, right? Understand what it is that their actual mission is on the ground. And I think it's easy to like jargon, right? We all have it. We all do it. God knows no one in my family knows what I do, no matter how many times I try to explain it. But like, I think seeing what a nonprofit does, what actual work on the ground they're accomplishing on a day-to-day basis from someone with a fresh pair of eyes can be really useful versus how it is that they describe themselves, right? Like, I think I view myself as a strategist because I think strategy, you have to be that little kid in the emperor's new clothes, right? You have to be able to wear different hats. You have to be able to reframe things in a way that makes sense to someone with no context. Like that's what we're doing. And that still applies.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for all those thoughts, Rashida. They're really helpful. Thank you.
My question was actually kind of a little bit the opposite. And it was sort of what it feels like when you're reverting back from a space which is more purposeful to your day job, when you're maybe just advising some clients like how to have more shareholder value. And I'm finding that a really tough like traverse at the moment. Like I'm doing it really inelegantly, and I find myself like kind of having little like sort of slightly almost teenage sort of outbursts with my boss who, you know, just doesn't get it, or like I'm finding that it's not an easy hop back and forth for me. And I wondered if other people felt that or if they had any kind of advice.
Oh my God, I've felt this. The day I came back from Standing Rock, I totally snapped on a whole team of people because I was like, this shit's stupid. Like, do you understand what's happening? Like, it was not one of my best moments, I have to say. And I think like that was a big lesson for me in like having to navigate that traverse back and forth. There's 2 ways that I do it, but I'd love to hear from anybody else. One is on every project I work on, I have to find something to fall in love with, regardless of what the project is. Either it's like the audience or the client or the mission or something, right? And so when I'm feeling that kind of whiplash of like, does this really matter? I just return to my love space. You're like, but I love this client or I love this audience. And I just try to like make sure I'm centering on that. And then other times when I'm also struggling with the whiplash, I just remind myself that the paying clients are subsidizing the other clients. And so this is what I do so I can do the other work. And a lot of times that snaps my attitude right into place. So I'm like, I need this money so I can do this other stuff. And that's what it's all about. And so those two things usually help me. But I would love to hear from anybody else on how you deal with that whiplash or that traverse.
I was going to say, so like Heidi, I've had both for sure. And the one thing that I have learned to do is try, when they're least expecting it, to drop those breadcrumbs and treat it like a test and learn. If we're going to maybe partner with somebody at a local level, or I had some kind of personal conversation with one of the clients where they were whatever their hot button was, but try to run with it, but bring it to the context of like, that would get you going back to the press thing, like that would get you local press, or then now you'd have an Instagram story. But I've disguised it in test and learn. So those sneaky and shady on my part, like tricksy-ish, it helps the clients take a bite, like being willing to take a safe risk, because you've treated it as a test and learn, and you've given them whatever the fuck, especially if they're just like, but I need people to buy my shit. Like in that yuck thing, if you give them this test and learn, they're usually amenable to it, because again, they don't know if they don't try. Maybe there's data that you can give them breadcrumbs on, and you know, it's a way they can use it or lose it money, depending on what it is. Like you put it for your profit clients, you put it back to the profit piece. And for your clients, like you love, because like Heidi, I am beyond in a liminal position right now. But the thing is, when I think about the people that I help and the causes that matter to me, it isn't work, right? Like you love it. And so in defining what help is, it's way more innate to you, right? Because you're just like, you're in it and you kind of have that intuition of what helps. So it's, I mean, and obviously that is way more gratifying, because you see that you like somebody can make out with you just because you did that Instagram post, and it like, sorry, I did not mean to be so graphic. But somebody is super happy and grateful for something that simple just because you really knew how much they appreciated it, versus, you know, the punning of agency team and I'm too busy and whatever it is. But I would definitely say test and learn is always a great mask right now.
Great. I love that.
You started to touch on measurement a little bit, and I think that, you know, whether you're a company that's judged by OKRs, or if you have KPIs, or if you have different indicators, depending on what you're trying to achieve, you know, would love to get a sense of how you navigate the conversations around metrics. Mm-hmm. I'm actually helping a growth stage company that's a nonprofit that's striving to be a for-profit B Corp in the near future. And I'm helping them with some of their brand strategy. And one of the conversations we've been having is, how do you pick the right metrics to follow? And what are the metrics that you can actually afford to be measuring over time, and that you're going to be able to use as an organization?
Yeah, I think you paused
found helpful.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I mean, there's so many different, I think like setting metrics for a nonprofit is similar. I mean, it's not similar to a for-profit, because for-profit is like, we ultimately just need to make the sale, right? Like that's one of your key metrics. But this is where I think brand work really helps, right? Because brand work helps you solidify like what you're really trying to achieve, get it tight, and what you believe in. And one of the things that I find where brand strategists can super help nonprofit spaces is that, and I'm going to answer your question a long way, Tammy, I'll get to the answer in a second, is that a lot of times when I walk into a nonprofit, they have so much language. You see this on websites all the time. Like when you go to donate somewhere and it's like, here's a paragraph, and then here's another paragraph. And it's like, you have a mission statement that is 6 sentences long. And I think it comes apart from that consensus culture that we were talking about with Elaine. I think it talks about just they care so much. So they don't want to cut anything out. They don't want to leave anyone out. And so for me, when it comes to metric setting, like I'm going through this little organization I work with right now, step one was actually like getting their brand really tight and being like, let's talk about your mission in one sentence. Let's talk about like your beliefs in 4 beliefs. Let's get this really tight. And then when you get to an OKR process, it actually kind of falls out pretty elegantly, because if the OKR or the metric does not ladder up to that core 1-pager about what this nonprofit's all about, then it probably shouldn't be a metric. And so this is why, like, whenever I get asked to do the metric conversation, I'm like, show me your like core mission statement first. Inevitably it's a shit show, and I say that with love. I really do. But this is a place where I really feel like brand strategists add value to the space, and then it's so much easier to do the metric stuff.
I think it's very valid as well in terms of making sure that people aren't being precious with some of the words and helping them understand that you can be more concise with your brand story that you're trying to get across. And I think that the other piece that I'd love input on is the measurement over time, because I think there's also this impression that it's going to be really expensive to keep measuring it over time. And I guess, so I just love perspective on, having that conversation that these are important things to measure over time. There's a small cost with some of them. Some of them are low to no cost. So, right. Just would love to get that perspective from people as well.
I'll jump in, and then I'd love to hear from other people. The way that there's 2 ways that I adopt this. One is that we get everything clean. We'll do like a 5-year objective. We'll do the 2-year, we'll do the 1 year, then we'll do the like month by month, right? Because things move and you got to have that flexibility in there. And you always have to be able to change your outlook if you need to. And in that, I try to make sure that there's metrics that can be organically caught by members of the team. A lot of times Salesforce is a really good tool for this. Like, can you just organically catch things that are happening? So if you're going to go out and do this anyway, you're going to do your work, put a measurement moment in your field work, right? Where you're actually measuring field stuff. Because a lot of times a nonprofit will go and do, but they won't think to count certain things or to grab certain things, right? And so a lot of measurement you can build in organically in nonprofits. And then for the things that need to be invested in, and I think this conversation is getting easier, and of course, Elaine can probably talk more to this because she works on the fundraising side. It's a lot easier to get donors to donate if there's numbers. At least that's what we found at Chan Zuckerberg. If you had some data points where it was like 30% increase here, 20% decrease over here, 50% increase in what we deployed in this community, there are so many places that funders are being asked to give their money to. I mean, especially the more wealthy the funder gets, right? A wealthy funder probably gets, 20 pitches a week as to like what they are being asked to fund. And knowing that their money is actually being put to work efficiently and working hard, we might disagree with that mentality, but that is the mentality. The mentality is like, I want to make sure it's working. And so for me, that's always been helpful in justifying some of the metrics costs, is just saying it's great for fundraising.
No, that's a great point. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course.